The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak on the Appropriation Bill number 3, 2012-13 and Appropriation Bill number 4, 2012-13. The two additional estimates bills seek to appropriate funds from the Consolidated Revenue Fund for additional expenditure requirements which have arisen since the May budget was brought down. In effect, they give effect to the announcements in the mid-year economic outlook, which was brought down around October. The irony is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that these things are probably just another mere statement or introduction to endless other blowouts since that time. Of course, since that time, since just October, we've had the Treasurer walk away from a surplus, given up on a surplus. Of course, there's no financial accounts which would inform ourselves or the rest of the community, the finance sector, people who are trying to do business out there, anyone trying to assess the state of the nation's books, trying to make with some confidence investment decisions, trying to invest major and multi-million or billion-dollar investments when no one has the foggiest idea about what the state of the books are. The government's walked away from it. So this appropriation bill is probably a foretaste, a forerunner of more that might be introduced into this place to overcome further reckless spending of this government, to further fill black holes. We know of $120 billion unfunded promises. What else is there? We've got a raft of things here, many of which just happened in the course of normal government, and accept that. But they are a symbol, if you like, another $1.27 billion symbol of a government that really is become quite inept at, in any way, managing the books. So much so that here we stand today, several months after the Treasurer has stepped away from a surplus, with absolutely no idea what the state of the books are. And yet every day we hear in the main chamber in particular, but I presume here and in the other place, cries for where's your costings? Well, of course the costings have been done. What no one knows, including ourselves, is how any of these things can be funded. What money is there? What money is there to fund? Is the government telling us how they're going to fund dental schemes? How they're going to fund? How they're going to fund an NDIS? How they're going to fund the education, the Gonski? Are they telling us anything about the funding? Not on your Nelly. That's not going to occur. And yet they want some anodyne discussion on the cost of things. We've put out the cost of things, if you hadn't noticed, on so many things. What we're still waiting for, and what the community's waiting for, what everyone's waiting for, is not only what money's going to be there. What's in the piggy bank? What will be in there? The government doesn't know itself. The Treasurer doesn't know. The Treasurer doesn't know.
Fraser.
And so, there's an embarrassment on the other side and sort of feigned smiles and all the rest. Well, better go away and sort out your Treasurer. Get him to release what the books are, what is in the books, so that we can have a sensible discussion, not only about appropriations, but the general finances of this nation. This is serious business. No wonder no one is investing out there. No wonder no one is taking risks. No wonder there's an investment strike in the business community. No wonder people are not buying houses, because there's no confidence. There is no confidence. And how could there be when they look at a Treasurer who's going whiter by the day, who stumbles through question time, who refuses to give one day, refuses on the basis of some shonky legal advice that he can't tell us what a certain tax is going to, what revenue they're going to get from a tax, and then the next day releases it after pressure from the Greens and ourselves. I mean, it's government by mistake, day in, day out, and the community absorbs it. They feel it, they see it, and they're shaken by it. So much so that much of the problems in the retail sector is because no one's spending, paying back the mortgage, paying back the plastic, because they're fearful of spending money, of making any commitments. They're not buying houses they normally would. The general run of business, the turnover of business, is just stopped in its tracks in many cases, in many parts of the country. There is a crisis of confidence, and there needn't be. There shouldn't be. If there was prudent, sensible management. The thing is that they've seen the waste. They have just seen the wanton waste in so much of what's been done. People understand that governments spend money, and they vote a government in, and they will accept that government will make decisions about expenditure on their behalf. They mightn't understand it, they mightn't even like it, but in many cases they will accept that that's a responsibility of government. What they will not accept is wanton waste. And that's what they've seen now for 5 years. So much of the reckless spending that's taken place by this government, so much of it has led to just irresponsible, pathetic, wanton waste. No attention to detail, no attempt to implement policies in a considered and rational and prudent fashion, and if people are just fed up to the back teeth with it. They can't understand it, they're angry about it, they're confused about it, and they feel let down. They feel deeply let down by this process. Now, through all of this, all we hear as a reason for it, and again, this is an insult to people, it's adding to that crisis of confidence. It is designed almost to undermine people's confidence in the government. Endlessly, we hear this crying wolf. It was somebody else's fault. The dog ate my homework. Month after month, parading in through this chamber, the main chamber and other chambers, the Treasurer and colleagues on that side of the House, saying that it's somebody else's fault. We've got to, as the Treasurer said, we have here a huge revenue whack, if you like, out of the blue, which has made it very hard to get to a surplus in 2012-13. Well, instead of crying wolf endlessly, why not take responsibility for their own mistakes? Why not take responsibility for the problems that this government has created? Of course, the truth is, over the first 4 months of this financial year, revenues were 9.2% higher than in the previous year. This is at the same time that the Treasurer is on his feet saying, we've taken a whack out of the blue. 9% increase in revenues since the budget. There's a lot of families who I think would do quite well, would be quite satisfied with a 9.2% increase in revenue. But of course, what did we see accompanying that revenue increase? A further 4% increase in spending in 4 months. 4% increase. This record level of spending of this government just continues to go on year in, year out, despite the sort of spin that we hear. And people understand it, and they see the waste. They see the waste. They know the 4%'s on top of what was already bloated and unnecessary spending of a massive order. So much so that they've spent $172 billion, would you believe, more than they have received in revenue. And it doesn't stop. There's no bells are ringing. No one in the government sort of saying, hang on, we better pull our heads in here. Even if you just stop new programs, over time it would reduce the proportion of government spending in the budget and take the pressure off. But no, it's not just a question. There's no programs of any order being cut. It's all new programs after new programs in the middle of a situation where now gross debt, and they say don't worry about gross debt. Well, that's what we pay interest on. That's the $7 billion plus a year that interest is being paid on, which was not being paid 5 years ago, not 1 cent 5 years ago, now $7 billion a year. $7 billion a year, that's 7 first-class world centres of excellence hospitals, if you wanted, in 1 year, just given in interest payments. It's the money that could go to fund the NDIS. We wouldn't have all the double backflips and all the machinations and what I can see coming down the track, and that is, some more tricky accounting to try and get through how they're going to fund some NDIS for future governments. Future governments will have to fund it, not this government, that's for certain. So we've got revenue steadily growing, but the government can't catch up with those spending increases. And why? Why? Well, what's happened, and you can see it back over every budget of this Treasurer, they've made assumptions, deliberately assumed unachievable levels of future revenue. I've seen it in business. I've seen CEOs with start-up businesses and whatever. They tell their board they're going to make millions of dollars in revenue, and they get the board and investors to commit to a lot of funding. They go and spend it, and then the revenue doesn't turn up. They don't get the contracts. They make it up. They make it up. They deliberately assume unachievable levels of revenue. This Treasurer, I look across the chamber each day and think, I'm looking at things I've seen before in another place, in another world, in the business world. This Treasurer is no different to some of these CEOs who make it up for their boards and their investors and get commitments of large lumps of money, either borrowed or invested, and then the revenue doesn't arrive. It's exactly what's happened here. He makes these politically inspired, deliberately assumed unachievable levels of future revenue assumptions in the budget, spends the money, and then when the money doesn't come in, the revenue doesn't occur, a more realistic revenue stream, which is still increasing, revenue's increased every year, still increasing. When that happens, he cries wolf. Woe is me. Woe is me, we hear all the time. Well, take some responsibility. Take some responsibility for the wanton and gross miscalculation on revenue forecasts, the unachievable assumptions that have been made. We've been saying this for years. Every budget, these revenue forecasts are not achievable. Lo and behold, that is what happens, and yet we hear, woe is me. We've got some write-down. They're writing down their own forecasts. It's a joke. It's a joke, but it's just part of the usual spin and management that we see from this government, the media management, rather than the housekeeping management, which is really what they were charged to do when they were voted in, or they assumed a minority government with others amongst the independents and the Greens. So what we've got is a situation which has been created by this government unnecessarily, and they say, well, the world is a difficult place. We've had a global financial crisis. I accept that. I accept that. The government took funding decisions which I think were grossly excessive. If they hadn't wasted billions and billions of it, it would have been somewhat better. The fact of the matter is that an inherited strong balance sheet, monetary policy, 3.25% reduction in interest rates, a devaluation of the Australian dollar went to 60 cents in the first quarter of 2009. We had the highest trade result in our history. The quarter after the global financial crisis. It brought billions of dollars into our economy and into the pockets of households. And in addition to that, we've had the heavy lifting by China demand. Those were the four things that got Australia an inherited economy in great shape, monetary policy, the devaluation, the automatic stabiliser of a devaluation, and China, 150-year highs in our terms of trade. We were so blessed. We've been so blessed compared with other parts of the world. They were the things that got us through. The government then came along 6 or 8 or 9 months later with a massive injection of spending. And on school halls, which was wasted in many cases, the wasteful spending on that, they could have done most of that work for half the price. Certainly lots of schools in my area were saying that the buildings could have gone up for half or less than what they did. Then we had the pink bats, that debacle. Then checks to dead people, for goodness sake. This is the sort of thing that leaves people just scratching their heads. It's why there is a crisis of confidence. And there we are with a situation created, and yet they say to us, but it's such a difficult climate out there. How could we get to surplus with Europe going so badly? Europe's pulled us down into the mire. Europe is still hurting us. Well, let me tell you, there are 7 other countries, including 5 in Europe, who are in surplus already. Now, if European countries can be back in surplus, there cannot be any excuse for Australia, which is at 150-year highs, 150-year highs in their terms of trade. And we are still, today, 20% higher in terms of trade than when the Howard government lost office. They keep telling us that the Howard government benefited from the rivers of gold. Well, the terms of trade are still 20% higher. They're coming back, but they're still 20% higher. And yet the Treasurer's saying he's got a whack out of the blue. How could that be a whack out of the blue when we've still got record levels of terms of trade compared with years ago, over the last years? What's going to happen now as the terms of trade come back to more normal levels? I tell you what's going to happen. We're going to find ourselves in the out years, next year, the year after, with growing and increasing structural deficits, all of which have been assumed away by unbelievable forecasts of revenue, or they've been funded by taxes that turn out not to reduce it, taxes which turn out not to return any income. Can you believe it? So we either got unbelievable and unachievable assumptions about revenue, which never materialise, or we've got taxes that have been introduced, 27 new or increased taxes, and we even get a tax which doesn't produce any money. But not only does it not produce any money of any consequence, and leave, again, a further black hole, which, again, further undermines confidence, which worries people deeply. You know, there's people waking up at 2:30 in the morning all over this country worried about whether they're going to keep their job. And why? Because they see a government in total disarray. They see a Treasurer who fumbles and mumbles through question time, looking ashen, and standing next to a Prime Minister who does no better, who keep telling us things which you can't trust, who signed a document and said, we won't change the mining tax. It's in black and white. Now today, virtually admitting that they're going to change the mining tax. How can business operate like this? How can people make decisions and feel comfortable that this country is in good hands when they keep seeing this charade of mistake and dissembling and incompetence? It's serious. It's serious. People, why is there anxiety at a time when we're so blessed with the resources we've got and the demand out there? It shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't be this way, but it is. And it's because of this government's incompetence and inability to focus on the job that they've got to do, to tell people as it is, to make truthful statements about what they think is going to happen with the books, and stop playing politics endlessly. Stop worrying about your own jobs and worry about people's other jobs out there. That's the responsibility of government, and it's just not acceptable that this would happen. And I should raise my voice. People are cross about it. I'm cross about it, but people out there, they're the ones. It's not about us here, it's about them. That's what it should be about. And yet here we are, we're going to go through this charade, I know, for months. There'll be more dissembling. There'll be more suggestions of other people's faults. There'll be more misrepresentation of the accounts. There'll be more clever accounting tricks, and there'll be increases in taxes. We can see it coming. Some way or other the super's going to happen. Already there's been so much speculation that people are frightened to invest or spend, go to the movies, do whatever. You know, they're putting the money aside. They're not sure they can afford it or not. What's going to happen? We've had another month of speculation. Clearly they're going to do something on super. They're going to get money from somewhere. They're going to try and tax people who've worked their tail off for years to put money aside. Now they're going to see it. Now they're going to see it taxed. Now they're going to see a threat, a doubt over their security in their later years. And we'll see a change of the mining tax. And the government will say, how clever are we? We've just raised some more revenue. But of course what they've done at the same time is cause a major problem with sovereign risk. That's forgotten. Forget about business. Forget about what... Don't put yourself in the shoes of people looking to risk billions of dollars. I went into Asia for a few days before Christmas to talk to business leaders and government leaders and others, but investors. I wanted to see what were the opportunities coming down the pipeline. What was our standing? What was going on? You know, I sat in with a meeting with the head of one of the region's major banks, an Asian bank, and he said to me, Mr. Robb, he said, could you explain something to me? He said, over the last 4 years, he said, we've actually backed investments to the tune of billions of dollars into Australia. He said, though, what's happened since is that there's been lots of rule changes. And he said there's been new taxes which have affected these investments. And he said the ROI, the return on investment, in nearly all these projects has now been deeply undermined. He said, could you explain what's going on? He said Australia historically has been associated with being able to invest with some certainty, that a deal's a deal. Once things are signed, once contracts are done, once we've reached some accommodation and understanding with the government, Australia has historically stuck with it. What he was saying, and here I was not being lectured to, but in a way I was, and it's so galling, he's really saying Australia and sovereign risk are now in the one sentence. It's never been the case. This is what's happening with this mining tax. This is what's happening. This is what's happening when you change things. This is what happens when you change super rules, having said you never will. You won't do it, of course you will. Not one dot, not one whatever. Not one whatever. No, won't do any of that. But no, it undermines, you're just undermining the ability and the confidence not only of investors in this country, but investors outside this country. People who already put big money in here and are confused themselves. You're confusing the world with the way in which you're managing the shop. By the way in which you're managing the shop. That's the way in which you're managing the shop. You can try and shout me down.
Excuse me, no.
You can try and shout me down. You'll have your turn. You get up and explain.
And the member for Goldstein will stop using the word you, please.
Okay. Those opposite will...
And they will cease interjecting. Let me deal with that. Continue in silence.
Thank you,
You'll
Madam
continue
Deputy
in
Speaker.
silence.
Well, that'd be nice. Thank you. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, here we are with a bill which has become almost a symbol of the uncertainty and the lack of knowledge anyone's got, including ourselves, of really what the state of the books are. It is just another chapter of many chapters of overspending.
Order. A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. Proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions.